Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And welcome, everyone, to the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today, and we are brought to you today by Simple Contacts. Right now, you can get $20 off your contacts at simplecontacts.com/martini20 or enter the code martini20 at checkout. Much more on that later in the podcast. And Jim, let's start with our good martini, which is your final item in today's Morning Jolt. This is from the Florida Sun-Sentinel. Captain Chris Mulligan, a military veteran and sheriff's office employee for 19 years, will replace Captain Jan Jordan. This is in Broward County, Florida, of course, the site of the high school shooting there in Parkland, Florida, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. The story goes on to say, Parkland city officials asked the sheriff's office to replace Jordan after complaints about her leadership during the shooting February 14th. Among the criticisms, a Coral Springs deputy fire chief repeatedly asked her for permission to send his medics into the school, but was rebuffed. At the time, the shooter had not been caught, and only a handful of specially trained SWAT paramedics were in the school. Jordan told the deputy fire chief she'd have to check before letting more medics enter, he said. By the time the whole building was deemed safe, there was no need. Everyone had been brought out by police or was dead. So, Jim, we've been chronicling the incompetence in some ways, the refusal to engage, all the way from the school resource officer to the standing behind your police cars till the incident was deemed over pretty much by the Broward County Sheriffs. Whatever you want to talk about in this story, it's making us slap our heads at every turn. So to finally have some accountability here is a good thing.
Yeah, now let's observe this is a small piece of the accountability that we feel probably was warranted in the situation. My closing question of today was, hey, can you take the sheriff with you? Sheriff Israel, who rather infamously knew that his officer had not gone into the building. That certainly was not presented to the public quickly, and in fact, he went out and he did the infamous CNN town hall, where he really made it sound like Dana Lash was the problem and not his own officer's failure. Then, of course, we learned about all the different times the shooter had contact with law enforcement, but never quite accumulated a legal record that would have prevented him from purchasing a firearm. Rush Limbaugh is celebrating an anniversary this week, and I've been thinking about his phrase, with no pun intended, considering how we're talking about a shooting, the drive-by media, and how certain stories become really big deal, and we see them on the cover of magazines and special prime time in-depth segments and gallons of newsprint and special sections and all this really intense coverage. And then it moves on. And there rarely seems to be the kind of, let's check in every couple months to see what's happened, to see what actually changed because of this horrific event. And I kind of feel like, Sheriff Israel probably feels like he's very close to having withstood the storm. That basically, yes, he was public enemy number one. He had this really awkward, really painful interview with Jake Tapper, in which he was talking about, it wasn't sticks and stones, it was, rubber glue. It was some sort of weird schoolyard taunt response to, if wishes were horses, I think was the general gist there. And it was just a sense of how could such a seemingly unprepared, unprofessional, just failure in his duties person assume such a powerful position in the community and then, of course, not be held accountable afterwards. Well, from our perspective, Greg, I think it's safe to say, no, we don't feel like he's been held accountable. At least someone in the chain of command has, and hopefully there's more to come. This is very much a time for voters down there to be paying attention to local government. And Greg, I'd like to, I got this from the local paper, and one of the reasons I felt the reason to spotlight it was for everyone in the country who cared a great deal back in the spring, it doesn't hurt to check in afterwards and see, hey, has the police force learned from these lessons? And at least, I think replacing at least this commander is a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people, regardless of where you are in the gun debate, would say the same about Sheriff Israel. And the fact that there hasn't been more of a cry for accountability from his perspective is stunning, honestly, given how many things were missed and just their conduct that day. It's absolutely staggering. So hopefully the voters will see things clearly. And when it comes to seeing clearly, Simple Contacts is the most convenient way to renew your contact lens prescription and reorder your brand of contacts from anywhere in minutes. It's vision care for the 21st century. The Simple Contacts vision test is self-guided and takes less than 5 minutes. Think of how much time you save compared to making an appointment, getting to the eye doctor, taking time off, and so on. It's designed by doctors, and licensed ophthalmologists review every test carefully to make sure your eyes look healthy and that your vision has not changed. But this is not a replacement for your periodic full eye health exam. What it is a great option for times in between those regular eye doctor visits.
Simple Contacts has all the brands and types of lenses that you're familiar with, so you never have to shop around to find your lenses at the best price. Simple Contacts has been rated with 5 stars more than 4,500 times on the App Store. You can text with the support team and always get to speak with a person. No automated robot systems here. Now, come on, it's summer and there's no shortage of reasons to have some extra contacts on hand. Beach days, vacations, outdoor activities, weddings. And you can use Simple Contacts to stock up for the season. The vision test is just $20. Now compare that with an appointment, which without insurance could cost you up to $200. The contact lens prices are unbeatable, standard shipping is free, and best of all, we are offering a promotion to our listeners.
Right now, 3 Martini Lunch listeners can get $20 off your contacts at simplecontacts.com/martini20 or enter the code martini20 at checkout. That's simplecontacts.com/martini20, martini20, or enter the promo code martini20 at checkout to get $20 off your order of contacts. Jim, you said in there's no bots with Simple Contacts when you contact Simple Contacts, and that's a good thing. We're going to talk about bots a little bit here in our Bad Martini. And for most rational people watching different platforms like Apple and Facebook and some other places, I think YouTube's part of it now too, has decided to no longer host InfoWars material, Alex Jones material and so forth. And so the debate is now erupting whether this is the tip of the iceberg to something far worse, or whether these sites have a responsibility to clamp down on certain speech. And so as that debate rages on, leave it to the liberals to try and take it much, much farther than it's already gone. Senator Chris Murphy, an elected U.S. senator from the state of Connecticut, tweets out, InfoWars is the tip of a giant iceberg of hate and lies that uses sites like Facebook and YouTube to tear our nation apart. These companies must do more than take down one website. The survival of our democracy depends on it. Now, he doesn't elaborate on what other sites he thinks are part of this giant iceberg of hate and lies. Is it everything he disagrees with, or is it, things that would go in the direction of white supremacy or other horrific ideologies and that sort of thing? But in case you're wondering, over at Reason, they have reported, using some pretty opinionated language here, about what they call, quote, a leaked memo circulating among Senate Democrats contains a host of bonkers authoritarian proposals for regulating digital platforms, purportedly as a way to get tough on Russian bots and fake news, to save Americans' trust in, quote, our institutions, democracy, free press, and markets. It suggests we need unprecedented and undemocratic government intervention into online press and markets. And some of the ideas include mandatory location verification, mandatory identity verification for anybody who posts, bot labeling, which they say is going to be pretty hard to figure out on Facebook or Twitter or anywhere else, so who's a bot and who's not. And then there's also defining popular tech as essential facilities, which, of course, is getting them in line to be regulated as utilities. This is all the leadership of Mark Warner, although other people are apparently getting warm to the idea. Jim, what do you make of it all?
Where to begin, Greg? The first thing that comes to mind is if you don't like the way Facebook is regulating and banning people on it, just wait till the government takes over, right? Also, it's really been fascinating to see how this has, I would argue, other than certain Democratic senators being ninnies, which is kind of a longstanding tradition, I think kind of scrambled some of the traditional party lines or battle lines in these sorts of issues. Look, let's get this out of the way. Alex Jones is an absolute creep. I really do believe that this is not an act. He is not playing a character. I think he's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And I think that probably he needs help in a deep way. This is not someone who is well and should be putting this stuff out there. Now, one of the things I note in today's Morning Jolt is that he is currently facing a serious lawsuit from parents of a Sandy Hook victim, who say that, Jones has gone off on long tirades against them, claiming that the whole thing was staged. And here's where it really kind of jumps out and becomes a lot more serious, is that he, put out there their address and personal information about them, doxing as they call it on social media these days. And so the question now is like, okay, now it's not just freedom speech. I have a right to say you're a ninny or something. I have the right to say things you don't like. I have now generated a form of harassment. I have now. The question is, has this gone over into threatening behavior? And this is going to be in the hands of a Texas jury and judge. Is this protected by the First Amendment, or has it crossed into something different? And no one really knows how this is going to shake out. Kind of an interesting article in Wired says the only time you really see these cases lose, the jury doesn't think that this is protected by the First Amendment, comes in the case of these talk radio shock jocks who basically do things so outside the norms that nobody in the jury can relate to it. I don't think anybody in that jury is going to be able to relate to Alex Jones and his claim that the Sandy Hook shootings were staged, and that these parents who were interviewed and who are active in trying to have a nonprofit and do something good out of their child's murder. I don't think the jury is going to be terribly sympathetic to them. Now, whatever you think about free speech, I do believe there's some space between speech that is controversial and bothers people, and speech that has been ruled legally indefensible by a judge and jury when you've had your day in court. So to me, my colleague David French says this is the clearer and better course of action for social media companies. Is don't say you're going to ban hate speech, because everybody's definition of hate speech is kind of arbitrary and fuzzy, and basically often comes down to they judge speech that they agree with much more generously than speech they disagree with. And eventually it turns into, well, we're going to come down like a ton of bricks on one side of the aisle, and we're going to give a tisk-tisk, watch yourself finger wag at the side of the aisle that we prefer. That would be a smarter and sharper and easier one. A lot of us people who are ordinarily sympathetic to the slippery slope argument are pointing out, look, if you lead to harassment campaigns against grieving parents, maybe this is one people are okay with letting them go. But the fact that Democratic senators say, this is our chance to regulate the internet, this is our chance to ban certain speech from the internet, it's not surprising. And in fact, I guess probably the bit of almost reverse psychology, Greg, maybe the single best friend that total free speech and the broadest definition of the First Amendment has is overreaching Democratic senators who can make it pretty obvious that they are simply looking to ban speech that they don't like.
Yeah, I'm pretty glad Ajit Pai is running the FCC right now. I'm not sure exactly what he could do if legislation were to pass. It clearly won't in the current political climate, but you never know what could happen down the pike. But I'm glad he's there, and I'm glad we've got the majority there. All right, let's move on, Jim, to our crazy martini now. And over the weekend, if you were watching a lot of news, it wasn't necessarily the biggest story, but there was footage of Venezuelan President, dictator Nicolas Maduro speaking at some sort of military parade, it seems like. And you can see his wife and all these military people behind him watching something with great alarm, and it turns out it was drones loaded with C4. Now, ultimately, none of the explosions appeared to hurt anyone. They didn't get close enough to him. A couple of them actually did detonate, but as far as we know, no injuries or fatalities. Now we know from CNN that authorities have identified the masterminds of the apparent drone assassination attempt on President Maduro, as well as the people who assisted them, according to Venezuelan Attorney General Tarek William Saab on Monday. The investigation, which involves 4 prosecutors, has yielded the locations from where the drones were piloted, as well as the arrests of 2 of the drone pilots. Saab's announcement comes a day after the interior minister there said 6 people had been arrested in connection with Saturday's attack on the Capitol. Maduro, as we said, survived the assault, during which drones armed with explosives flew toward him as he spoke at a military parade, an attack he blamed on far-right elements and Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos. Colombia called the claim absurd and said that it had become customary for Maduro to blame Colombia for any kind of problem in his country. And given the number of problems, I guess he's blaming Colombia quite often lately. So, Jim, who knows if this was staged? Who knows if this was an actual assassination attempt? We know Venezuela is a mess, so the fact that one of the original statements considered the assassination attempt a betrayal to the motherland shows just how much the socialism is now rooted into the government there. What's your thought on all this?
Yeah, so I was waiting you to summarize it a little more succinctly, Greg, and say, and some sad news today. Nicolas Maduro was not killed in an assassination attempt against him by drone. Kudos for the innovation, guys. Good try. Didn't work out. Now, of course, obviously there are a couple of voices that have speculated about whether this was actually staged, whether this was organized by the regime to kind of stir up patriotism. There are probably a lot of Venezuelans who don't necessarily like Maduro and are very upset with the way things are going, but who don't necessarily want to see him assassinated either. I think what I'm more struck by, though, is we've been hearing about this. Think about all the times you've seen in sci-fi movies, drones chasing people and things like that. Just the kind of DARPA is very heavily looking into this sort of thing. And everybody, as soon as drones became a sort of thing that you started seeing over ballparks and beaches and various public places like that, various folks calculated and figured out and said, that would not be a terribly complicated way to hurt someone, either crashing the drone into them deliberately or putting some sort of explosive or something designed to hurt them. And it's been, what would that ever happen? Well, now it appears to have actually happened, whether this was organized by the regime in some sort of propaganda ploy or whether it really was critics of the regime trying to use it to kill him. And I kind of wonder if we're entering into a new era of drone warfare, not just being done by Lockheed Martin and the U.S. Air Force and large, and Predator drones and stuff like that, and instead just your ordinary, casual, store-bought at the mall type drones, outfitting it with anything from you can imagine the type of improvised explosive devices that fly through the air. And I just kind of felt like everyone could use some more anxiety on this Tuesday, Greg. Just imagine your neighbor's kid with a bunch of steak knives. What's the worst that could happen, right? Dive bombing with sharp, pointy objects or things like that. I do think actually you might see a lot more restrictions on it. Obviously, they've already taken steps to kind of keep it out of the air, places where airports and other things like that. Every now and then you get a warning that there's been a drone flew too close to the White House or something like that. It's very sad. Every little innovation in technology has its those who abuse it, those who use it for malevolent purposes. I wouldn't be surprised if you see a lot more drone regulations in the future. Now, good luck controlling it. I think a lot of people will find it very challenging to control this. But I think what started out as this fun little hobby and being able to use a camera and fly around your house and look at yourself and look at your neighbors and stuff like that. I think it's very likely that you'll see more people adopting this. And the only good news is sometimes it's easy to see them coming. So good luck, everybody.
On that cheery note, Jim, we'll talk to you tomorrow.
At least we're not droning on, Greg.
Hopefully not. Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. And a quick reminder to all our listeners that if you want 20% off your order of contact lenses, head to simplecontacts.com/martini20.